Alcatraz. You hear the name, and what do you think of? Fear, right? Punishment. A place you could never, ever escape. For years, sitting out there on that hunk of rock in San Francisco Bay, it was the end of the line for America's worst criminals. But here's the thing. The island's chilling reputation started way before the first prisoner ever set foot there.
Centuries ago, the local tribes, they wouldn't go near the place. They believed it was home to malevolent spirits, a place of bad energy. It seems like the land itself was considered cursed, a feeling that just kind of stuck around as it became a military fort and then, of course, the most notorious prison on Earth.
So, today, Alcatraz is famous for its ghosts, right? You hear all these stories, phantom screams, shadowy figures, bone-chilling cold spots. But are these just spooky campfire tales? Or are they clues to a kind of horror that is way more real? One that's rooted not in the supernatural, but in the unbelievable suffering that literally soaked into the walls of that prison.
All right, so first, let's just get into the stories themselves. The accounts from guards, from inmates, from modern-day visitors that have really cemented this legend of Alcatraz being haunted.
Okay, so you had the prison, and then you had D Block. It was basically the prison inside the prison. And at the very bottom, the coldest, darkest part, were the cells they called the hole. An inmate could get thrown in there for up to 19 days. No light, no sound, not a single bit of human contact. Just you alone in the crushing total darkness. The most infamous story to ever come out of the hole is about an inmate back in the 1940s. The minute that heavy steel door slammed shut, he started screaming his head off. He was yelling to the guards that something was in there with him, some kind of creature with glowing, burning eyes. The guards, well, they had heard it all before. They figured he was just trying to get out, so they ignored him. The screaming went on for hours and hours, all through the night. And then suddenly, it stopped. The next morning, the guards found him dead. An autopsy said he'd been strangled, but the handprints on his throat weren't his. And this is where the story gets really bizarre. Later that same day, during the prisoner count, multiple guards and inmates swore they saw his ghost standing there in the lineup, only for it to just vanish right in front of them. And the stories, they just keep coming. People reported hearing Al Capone's banjo music drifting from his old cell long after he was gone. Even a hard-nosed, skeptical warden admitted he once heard a woman crying from inside the dungeon walls. And this stuff isn't just ancient history. Just this year, in 2024, a climate researcher staying on the island ran out of his room in the middle of the night, terrified after hearing a phantom piano and what sounded like a whole crowd of people moving furniture in the empty room upstairs. These stories are undeniably terrifying, no question about it. But what if the horror of Alcatraz isn't coming from the dead? What if it's coming from the minds of the living? What if there's a scientific explanation for a creature with burning eyes? Let's really look at the punishment in the hole. It boils down to one thing: sensory deprivation. You're systematically cutting off sight, sound, and touch. And what we know now is that when the human brain is starved of all that outside information, it starts to do some really weird things. It starts to create its own reality.
For years, a Harvard psychiatrist named Dr. Stuart Gracian has been the leading voice on this exact topic. He studied hundreds of prisoners in solitary and has documented the incredible psychological damage it inflicts. And his work, well, it gives us a brand new and maybe even scarier lens to look at the ghosts of Alcatraz.
See, Dr. Gracian discovered that this kind of extreme isolation, it doesn't just make you sad or anxious. It can trigger a very specific, very acute psychiatric syndrome, basically a type of delirium where the mind literally starts to break apart. Just look at these symptoms. The brain goes into overdrive. It becomes hypersensitive to everything, so the tiny drip of a faucet can sound like a cannon blast. It starts inventing things that aren't there, distortions, illusions, and then full-blown vivid hallucinations. All this is happening while you're having massive panic attacks, becoming paranoid that everyone is plotting against you, and, this is the scariest part, losing control of your own thoughts and impulses. Okay, so now let's put these two stories, the supernatural one and the scientific one, right next to each other. How well do the ghost stories of Alcatraz actually line up with the documented clinical effects of extreme isolation? And this is where it all just clicks. That inmate seeing a creature with burning eyes, that lines up perfectly with vivid visual hallucinations. Hearing Al Capone's banjo from an empty cell, classic auditory hallucination. The phantom cannons and screams, that's hyperresponsivity. The brain taking a tiny normal sound and amplifying it into something terrifying. The constant feeling of being watched, a core symptom of paranoia. And that poor inmate's violent, unexplained death, it could tragically be a complete loss of impulse control, leading to self-harm during a psychotic break.
Looking at it through this scientific lens doesn't make the stories less horrifying. I'd argue it makes them even more so. It suggests the terror wasn't some random ghost. It was a predictable, neurological breakdown caused by unimaginable cruelty. And, this isn't some newfangled idea. Almost 200 years ago, the author Charles Dickens visited a prison that used solitary confinement, and he described what he saw with chilling precision. He knew, even back then, that this wasn't about reforming someone, it was about burying them alive inside their own head. So this brings us to the real heart of it all. The ghosts of Alcatraz might not be the spirits of the dead. They might be something we can actually understand, the psychological echoes of minds being shattered under pressure. The terror those men felt was so real, so intense, that it left an imprint on a place itself, a story, an echo that we now interpret as a haunting.
So I'll leave you with this final haunting thought. Which is the more terrifying story? A prison haunted by ghosts, or a prison haunted by the undeniable proof of what happens to the human mind when you systematically try to break it? The answer, just like the fog that rolls over that island, is deeply, deeply unsettling.